"I never loved you," said a corporate wife, then left him a final message. The camera flashes were blinding, a strobe light of manufactured perfection. "Smile, darling," Daniel whispered. His hand rested firmly, just a fraction too firmly, on the small of Claire's back. To the world, they were the untouchable power couple. Daniel Reed had just been crowned Entrepreneur of the Year in a grand ballroom in downtown Manhattan. Claire, standing beside him in a breathtaking crimson gown, was the ultimate corporate wife, graceful, supportive, perfect. They looked invincible. But the moment the heavy oak door of the VIP dressing room clicked shut, the illusion evaporated. The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. Daniel let out a long breath, pulling at his silk tie. He didn't look at her. He just walked over to the gilded mirror, adjusting his cuffs with practiced precision. "You played your part well tonight," he said. His voice was smooth, casual. He turned, his eyes sweeping over her from head to toe. A calculated appraisal. "The red suits you, Claire. But next time, let's avoid the plunging neckline when my top investors are in the room. We want them looking at the quarterly projections, not my wife." It wasn't a request. It was an instruction. Any other night, Claire would have nodded. She would have apologized softly, molding herself back into the quiet, compliant shape he required. Not tonight. Claire didn't blink. She didn't argue. She didn't even sigh. Slowly, she raised her hands behind her neck. The platinum clasp of her diamond necklace, his extravagant anniversary gift, her glittering collar, came undone with a soft metallic click. She let it slip from her skin. She dropped it. The heavy stones hit the glass vanity with a cold, hollow thud that echoed in the quiet room. Daniel paused, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "What are you doing?" Claire turned to face him. There was no anger in her dark eyes, no tears of betrayal, no trembling lower lip, just an absolute, terrifying emptiness. It was the look of a woman who had already packed up her soul and moved out years ago. "Let's get a divorce." "I never loved you," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It was a quiet, devastating statement of fact. Daniel froze. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. "Claire, what kind of joke?" She didn't wait for him to finish. She picked up her coat, turned her back on him, and walked out the door. The sharp click of her heels faded down the long, empty hotel corridor. Daniel stood alone in the dressing room for a few seconds. He didn't chase her. He didn't panic. Instead, a slow, arrogant smirk crept back onto his face. He straightened his collar, pouring himself a fresh glass of bourbon from the vanity cart. "She's just throwing a tantrum," he thought. Let her pout. With a relaxed exhale, Daniel opened the door and walked back out into the glittering ballroom, seamlessly stepping back into the spotlight. He raised his glass, clinking it against the champagne flutes of his top investors. He laughed loudly at their jokes. He absorbed their praises with his signature, charming smile. In his mind, the logic was flawless. Why would he worry? Who in their right mind would be stupid enough to walk away from this? He had just been crowned the #1 entrepreneur in the city. He provided the penthouse, the black-tier credit cards, the prestige. He was absolutely certain she couldn't survive a single week without his money and his direction. By the time Daniel returned to their penthouse apartment drunk, she was gone. No phone calls, no dramatic text messages. By morning, her number was disconnected and her personal belongings were wiped clean from their home. The perfect corporate wife had simply vanished into the night. 2 weeks had passed since Claire vanished. In the glass-walled offices of Reed Consulting, Daniel sat behind his mahogany desk. He stared blankly at his computer screen, the very picture of a broken, exhausted man. His business partner Marcus stepped into the room, shaking his head. "You need to go home, Daniel. You can't keep sleeping in the office." Daniel rubbed his face, his voice a perfect, trembling whisper. "I can't, Marcus. Every time I walk into that empty house, it kills me. I just want her to be safe. I think the new HR director role was too much pressure. She's been working too hard. I should have seen it." He didn't cast blame. He only offered practiced, pathetic grace, and it worked brilliantly. At the city's elite dinner parties, the whispers were venomous. She used him. A partner's wife murmured over a martini. She stayed just long enough to climb the corporate ladder, and once she got the title, she dropped him. So ungrateful. To the public, Daniel was a saint. But the public didn't know the suffocating reality of the Reed penthouse. They didn't know the delicate, terrifying ecosystem of the three people living inside those walls: Daniel, Claire, and Mila, Claire's 16-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. A quiet evening. 6 months ago. To the outside world, Daniel was the generous stepfather who had rescued a struggling single mother, but inside the bone-come-square-foot apartment, the air was always dangerously thin. Claire stood in the pristine kitchen, slicing vegetables. Suddenly, the rhythmic, heavy thud-thud-thud of Daniel's Oxfords echoed on the marble staircase. Claire didn't just turn her head, her entire body violently flinched. The knife slipped from her trembling hand, clattering against the marble counter. Her shoulders hiked up to her ears, her eyes darting to the floor, holding her breath until his footsteps finally passed the kitchen archway. He hadn't raised a hand. He didn't have to. The fear was already hardwired into her bones. That invisible terror had bled into Mila, too. She had learned to survive by becoming a ghost, constantly avoiding her stepfather's calculating gaze. One night, the hallway was completely dark. Daniel stood quietly outside Mila's bedroom door, his shadow stretching across the floor. "Mila, sweetheart," he coaxed, his voice dripping with a sickening sweetness. "Open the door. Your father brought you some tea." From inside the room, the sharp, heavy click of a deadbolt sliding into place was her only immediate answer. "I'm sleeping, Daniel." "Leave it outside," the teenager's voice replied. It was thin, cold, and entirely unaccepting. The stepfather didn't walk away. He just stood there in the dim hallway for 5 long minutes, staring at the brass handle, not moving, just waiting to see if his silent presence would break her. Present day. Back in the bright, bustling lounge, Daniel took a slow sip of his bourbon. Friends patted his shoulder, offering endless pity for the abandoned husband. He smiled a sad, grateful smile. But underneath the heavy table, out of sight, his hand was perfectly steady. He wasn't a man in mourning. He was a hunter, patiently waiting for his prey to realize she couldn't survive in the wild. 8 years ago, Claire was bleeding out financially. A brutal divorce had left her with a depleted bank account, a cramped apartment in Queens, and an 8-year-old daughter. She was drowning. Enter Daniel Reed. He didn't arrive on a white horse. He arrived in a tailored Brioni suit, armed with endless patience and a Black American Express card. He paid Mila's private school tuition. He cooked dinner when Claire was too exhausted to stand. He listened. He cared. To a desperate single mother, he wasn't just a man, he was a lifeboat. So, she married him. She traded the chaos of her independence for the absolute security of his wealth. But a lifeboat is only safe until the captain decides to lock you in the hull. The invisible chains didn't appear overnight. They were forged slowly, masterfully disguised as acts of profound, selfless love. It was the morning of Claire's final interview for a vice president position. The air in the penthouse was thick with her frantic, panicked energy. "Where is it?" Claire muttered, tearing through her leather briefcase. Her presentation portfolio, the blue one. She had placed it exactly in the dead center of the marble kitchen island at midnight. She knew she did. She had double-checked it 3 times before turning off the lights. Now, the island was completely bare. "Mila, did you see my blue folder?" Claire called out, her heart hammering against her ribs. The clock was ticking. In 20 minutes, she was going to be late. The career she was trying to rebuild was slipping through her fingers. She tossed sofa cushions onto the hardwood floor, her breathing shallow and ragged. Daniel walked into the kitchen, sipping an espresso. He was dressed flawlessly, the picture of absolute, terrifying calm. "What's wrong, darling?" he asked mildly. "My portfolio." "I left it right here," Claire said, her hands shaking as she pointed to the empty counter. I swear to God, Daniel, I left it right on the island. Are you sure? He asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. He didn't offer to help her look. He just watched her unravel. You were up very late, Claire. You were exhausted. I know where I put it. Her voice cracked. It was the desperate sound of a woman losing her grip on her own reality. Daniel let out a soft, patronizing sigh. He set down his espresso cup, walked slowly down the hall into the adjacent study, and emerged 10 seconds later. He held up the blue folder. It was on the floor in the study, right next to the trash can, he said quietly. Claire stopped breathing. She stared at the folder. No, I didn't go into the study last night. I wouldn't put it by the trash. Daniel closed the distance between them. He didn't yell. He didn't sneer. Instead, he reached out, his large, warm hand gently stroking her hair. You're so forgetful lately, Claire, he murmured, his thumb brushing affectionately against her cheek. His voice was dripping with toxic sympathy. You're too stressed. It's affecting your memory. Claire trembled. She looked at the blue folder, and then up into his deeply concerned eyes. Why don't you just quit? Daniel whispered, pulling her into a slow embrace that felt suffocatingly tight. Let me take care of you. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone. I can give you everything. He didn't hit her. He didn't break her bones. He did something far more dangerous. He bent her reality. As Claire stood there, clutching the folder she knew she hadn't moved, a terrifying seed of doubt took root in her mind. Maybe I am losing it. Maybe I really do need him. That was the dark brilliance of his abuse. Daniel didn't destroy her mind with violence. He dismantled her sanity with kindness, making sure that when she finally fell apart, he would be the only one there to put the pieces back together exactly the way he wanted them. The realization didn't happen overnight. It finally hit her on a Tuesday, during a lavish charity gala 3 years into their marriage. Daniel was standing across the room, effortlessly charming a state Supreme Court judge over champagne. He had a hand resting heavily on Claire's waist, pulling her flush against his side. My wife, Daniel told the judge, his voice dripping with practiced, sorrowful affection. She's been a bit fragile lately, the stress of her career, you know. Her memory isn't what it used to be, but I make sure she's well taken care of. The judge looked at Claire with deep, patronizing pity. You're a good man, Daniel. She's lucky to have you. Claire didn't blink. She just smiled. But behind that perfect, painted smile, the terrifying reality finally locked into place. She wasn't losing her mind. She was being hunted. So, why didn't she just run? Why didn't she pack a bag, grab Mila, and vanish that very night? Because the penthouse wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, and Daniel controlled every single exit. Standing under the crystal chandeliers, Claire did the brutal math of her survival. If she filed for divorce, Daniel wouldn't just take the penthouse or the bank accounts. He would take her daughter. He had spent years meticulously painting a masterpiece of a lie. To their friends, their doctors, and the courts, she was the erratic, mentally unstable mother. He was the wealthy, patient, saintly stepfather. If she fought him now, his army of corporate lawyers would use her engineered fragility to slaughter her in family court. A judge would hand Mila right over to the monster. She couldn't escape the cage. Not yet. So, later that night, in the suffocating silence of their master bedroom, Claire made a terrifying choice. She chose emotional, clinical death. Did you embarrass me on purpose tonight? Daniel whispered in the dark. He stood behind her at the vanity mirror, his voice a razor blade wrapped in velvet. Standing there like a mute, are you losing your mind again, Claire? In the past, she would have panicked. She would have cried, apologizing, begging him to believe she was sane. Tonight, she simply stopped. She took a slow, deep breath. She let the panic drain completely out of her chest, replaced by the cold, calculating instincts of a senior HR director. Manage the risk. Neutralize the threat. Show absolutely no emotion. Claire turned around. Her dark eyes were entirely empty. Absolute zero. I apologize if my behavior was suboptimal tonight, Daniel, she replied smoothly, Her voice was a flat, corporate dial tone. Daniel stopped. He frowned. He reached out, his fingers digging slightly into her bare shoulder, probing for a flinch, probing for fear. Claire didn't move a single muscle. "You're so cold lately," Daniel muttered, his eyes narrowing in frustration. "It's like sleeping next to a ghost." "Just focused on the quarterly projections," she said, her expression a perfect blank mask. "Go to sleep." Daniel thought he had won. He thought he had finally broken her spirit, turning her into a compliant, mindless doll. He was completely wrong. The ice in her veins wasn't defeat. It was armor. She had frozen her own heart solid, choosing to endure his psychological torture with a deadened soul. She was buying herself the one thing she desperately needed to destroy him: time. For 3 long years, while Daniel slept the deep, untroubled sleep of a narcissist, Claire went to work. It was always high. 10 a.m. The penthouse was dead quiet, swallowed by the heavy silence of the sleeping city. The only illumination in Claire's private study was the cold, harsh blue glow of her encrypted laptop screen. She didn't spend those nights crying into a glass of wine. She didn't write tear-stained diary entries, begging the universe for a way out. She became a forensic auditor of her own marriage. In her professional life, Claire was a master at building airtight cases against toxic corporate executives. She knew exactly how to track liability. She knew how to document behavioral patterns. Now she simply turned those lethal HR skills onto her own husband. Daniel was the ultimate liability, and Claire was building the ultimate termination file. She started small, physical evidence. She purchased military-grade, voice-activated micro-recorders. She didn't buy them with credit cards. She bought them with untraceable cash from a discreet electronics shop in New Jersey. With surgical precision, she planted them exactly where the abuse happened, taped beneath the marble lip of the kitchen island, wedged behind the heavy leather-bound books in his private library, hidden inside the air vent of his Mercedes. She captured every single whisper, every twisted version of reality. Every time he told her she was crazy, every time he threatened Mila with a gentle, terrifying smile. "You're nothing without me, Claire." His recorded voice would hiss softly through her headphones at 10 a.m. Claire would listen, her face completely expressionless. She would pause the audio, open a black moleskin notebook, and write in an encrypted shorthand: "August Moorbont. Tham, Murhai PM, kitchen. Gaslighting incident. Attempted memory manipulation." She was establishing a documented, undeniable history of severe emotional abuse. But Claire knew how the world worked. Emotional abuse was hard to prove in a courtroom against a wealthy, charismatic man. If she wanted to destroy him, she needed to burn down his empire. Financial fraud and corporate misconduct, that was a death sentence. Daniel was incredibly arrogant. He felt so invincible, so absolutely certain of his dominance, that he grew careless with his digital security at home. Every Tuesday night, while he lay in their king-sized bed just down the hall, Claire slipped into his home office. Her fingers flew across his unlocked keyboard in complete silence. She mirrored his hard drives. She sifted through his deleted server trash. She intercepted deeply confidential internal emails from Reed Consulting. And she found exactly what she was looking for. "You really are a monster, Daniel," she whispered to the empty room as she opened a hidden PDF file. There it was. Offshore wire transfers he had deliberately concealed from his board of directors. Embezzlement disguised as consulting fees. She dug deeper. She found the hush money agreements, massive quiet payouts to 2 female junior analysts who had suddenly, mysteriously resigned the previous year after attending business trips with him. Claire didn't confront him. She didn't scream. Her finger simply hovered over the mouse, and with a soft click, she forwarded every single bank statement, every non-disclosure agreement, and every incriminating email thread to a secure, untraceable offshore server. She wasn't just preparing for a divorce. She was arming a nuclear bomb. When the time finally came to leave, Daniel wasn't just going to lose his compliant wife. He was going to lose his wealth, his pristine reputation, and his freedom. All she needed now was the perfect trigger. The monster in the penthouse didn't roar. He whispered. For years, Claire had successfully acted as a human shield, absorbing every ounce of Daniel's psychological venom. She thought her emotional death would bore him. She thought if she gave him absolutely nothing, he would leave her daughter alone. She was wrong. Toxic men don't stop, they just pivot. When the stepfather realized he could no longer break the mother, he quietly turned his attention to the 16-year-old girl living down the hall. It started subtly. A casual comment criticizing Mila's friends, a concerned restriction on her curfew. Then, it escalated into total psychological isolation. One evening, 3 months before Claire finally vanished, she arrived home early from the office. The penthouse was deathly quiet. As she walked softly down the hardwood hallway, she heard a voice coming from Mila's half-open bedroom door. It was Daniel. His tone was buttery, soothing, and absolutely lethal. "I just don't want you to get hurt, Mila," Daniel murmured gently. "Those girls at school aren't really your friends. They're just using you. They're jealous of the lifestyle I provide for you." Claire froze in the shadows, holding her breath. "And your mother." Daniel sighed, a heavy, theatrical sound of disappointment. "You know how she is. She doesn't really care about what you're going through. She only cares about her job, her title, her next promotion. I'm the only one who actually pays attention to you. I'm the only one who understands you. You know your father loves you, right?" Mila didn't argue. She didn't fight back. She just let out a small, defeated whimper. Daniel was applying the exact same formula. Isolate, gaslight, control. He was systematically dismantling a 16-year-old girl's reality, making her believe the world was cold, her mother was absent, and her abuser was her only sanctuary. The true devastation of his work revealed itself a week later. It was past midnight. Claire woke up to a strange, muffled sound. She walked into Mila's bedroom, but the bed was empty. The expensive silk sheets were perfectly flat. The sound came again, a hitched, suffocated breath from the walk-in closet. Claire pushed the heavy wooden door open, the pale light from the hallway spilling into the darkness. Mila was sitting on the floor, pushed as far back into the corner as physically possible. She had her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, pulling them up to her chest. She was rocking back and forth, her eyes wide, glassy, and completely terrified. Claire's breath caught in her throat. It was like looking into a brutal, time-traveling mirror. It was the exact same posture, the exact same shattered expression Claire had worn 5 years ago when the golden handcuffs first locked around her wrists. "Mila," Claire whispered. The teenager violently flinched. "Daniel," Mila gasped, her voice trembling with sheer panic. "I'm studying, Daniel, I'm sorry. I'm quiet." "No, no, baby, it's Mom," Claire said, dropping to her knees and pulling her shaking daughter into her arms. Mila collapsed into her mother's chest, sobbing silently, terrified of making a sound that might wake the man down the hall. As Claire stroked her daughter's hair, feeling the violent tremors in Mila's spine, the timeline in her head shattered. She had been waiting to gather a few more offshore bank statements, waiting to build an absolutely bulletproof corporate fraud case so she could destroy him entirely. But seeing Mila broken on the closet floor, the waiting game died right there in the dark. Mila was 16 years old. In the eyes of a family court judge, she was no longer a child who could be easily manipulated or silenced. She was a young adult. She was a witness. Her testimony of emotional abuse would finally hold undeniable legal weight. Claire stared over her daughter's shoulder into the shadows of the closet. The protective ice in her veins melted, instantly replaced by something far more dangerous. Boiling, focused rage. The game was over. It was time to pull the trigger. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 month after Claire vanished. Daniel sat in his corner office, staring out at the gray New York skyline. He had perfectly cultivated the image of the grieving, abandoned husband. His board members had sent him expensive scotch. His colleagues walked on eggshells around him. He felt utterly untouchable. Then, a soft ping cut through the heavy silence of the room. An email notification popped up on his monitor. Sender, Claire Reed. Subject line, closure. Daniel leaned forward, a slow, arrogant smirk creeping onto his face. Finally, he thought. She ran out of money. He clicked the attachment. A video file opened, expanding to fill the screen. The video flickered to life. Claire was sitting in a sparse, white room. The lighting was harsh, cold, and completely unforgiving. She wore a simple gray sweater, stripped of the diamonds and designer silk he had used to chain her. Her face was a mask of absolute, chilling calm. She looked directly into the camera, her dark eyes piercing right through the lens. "Daniel," she began. Her voice was steady, a flat, clinical tone. "If you're watching this, it means I'm finally gone long enough for you to hear the truth." Daniel frowned. He reached for his scotch, feeling a sudden, strange tightness in his chest. "Do you remember the night I left?" Claire asked the camera. "When I told you that I never loved you. You thought it was a tantrum. You thought it was the fragile, irrational outburst of a woman who was losing her mind." Claire leaned slightly closer to the lens. "It wasn't a tantrum, Daniel. It was the absolute truth. But what you didn't realize was that I stayed just long enough to understand exactly how you destroy people." Right as Claire uttered those words, the heavy mahogany door of Daniel's office swung open. Marcus, his business partner, stood in the doorway. He wasn't offering sympathy today. His face was ash white. "Daniel," Marcus said, his voice shaking, "the board of directors is convening an emergency meeting, right now." Before Daniel could answer, his desk phone started ringing. Then, his personal cell phone buzzed violently against the wood. On the laptop screen, Claire kept talking. Her voice layered perfectly over the chaotic ringing in the office. "I know about the offshore accounts." "Daniel," her recorded voice echoed. "I know about the consulting fees you funneled through the Cayman shell companies." Daniel stared at the screen in pure horror. He grabbed his cell phone. It was his lead corporate attorney. "Daniel," the lawyer barked over the line, panic bleeding through the speaker. "What the hell did you do?" "The entire board just received an anonymous, encrypted hard drive. Every wire transfer, every hidden payout, every non-disclosure agreement you forced those junior analysts to sign. You're suspended, effective immediately. Security is on their way up to escort you out of the building." The phone slipped from Daniel's sweaty grip. It clattered onto the desk. On the video, Claire didn't miss a beat. "And I didn't stop at your company." The desk phone was still ringing. Marcus stepped into the room, staring at Daniel with pure disgust, and hit the speaker button. "Mr. Reed," a stern voice echoed through the office. "This is the clerk for the New York State Family Court. You are hereby served notice. Your wife, Claire Reed, has filed for absolute divorce. Furthermore, a judge has just granted a permanent restraining order for both Claire and Myla Reed." Daniel couldn't breathe. The air was sucked completely out of the room. "We have received a 400-page dossier," the clerk continued relentlessly. "Audio recordings, transcripts, and psychological evaluations detailing severe, systematic emotional abuse." The walls of Daniel's glass empire were shattering all around him at the exact same second. He looked wildly at Marcus, who was backing away from him. He looked at the two uniformed security guards, stepping off the elevator. And finally, he looked back at the laptop screen. Claire offered one last smile. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of an executioner. "You spent 8 years trying to make me believe I was crazy, Daniel," she whispered, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "But you forgot one thing. Crazy people don't keep receipts." The screen cut to black. The glass walls of Reed Consulting were no longer a symbol of power. They were a fishbowl, and Daniel was drowning inside. 2 security guards stood by the heavy mahogany door, watching with blank, unforgiving expressions. Daniel was desperately shoving personal files into a leather briefcase. His hands, usually so steady and precise, were violently shaking. For the first time in his meticulously curated life, the architect of reality had completely lost control of the narrative. He needed an anchor. He needed someone, anyone, to reflect the image he so desperately believed in, the image of the benevolent, patient savior. He pulled out his cell phone, his thumb slipping on the glass screen, and dialed Mila's number, his stepdaughter. She was young, she was malleable. He had spent years programming her to rely on his version of the truth. The phone rang. Once, twice. Pick up, he chanted silently. Hello? Her voice was soft, distant. Daniel exhaled a shaky breath, instantly slipping back into his velvet soft, deeply concerned tone. Mila, honey, thank God. Listen to me very carefully. Your mother, she's having a severe episode. She's very sick, Mila. She's making up terrible lies, causing a massive scene. I just want to protect you. Tell me where you are, and your father will come get you. A heavy silence hung on the line. But it wasn't the fearful, obedient silence Daniel was used to. It was the heavy, judging silence of a jury. Daniel, Mila finally spoke. Her voice didn't tremble. It was colder than the winter air outside. What is it, sweetheart? Just tell me where. The micro-recorders under the kitchen island. Mila interrupted, her tone flat and precise. The cameras hidden inside the air vents. Daniel froze. The blood completely drained from his face. Mila, what are you saying? You thought Mom was the only one in the house you were making crazy, the 16-year-old replied. But I'm the one who helped her install them. We got everything. Click. The dial tone echoed loudly in his ear. Daniel slowly lowered the phone. The severance of that call wasn't just a lost connection. It was a guillotine dropping on his entire identity. The millions in offshore accounts were gone. The prestigious company was gone. But as he stood shivering in his half-empty office, the true, agonizing horror finally set in. He looked at his own reflection in the dark, powered-off monitor on his desk, the good man, the generous provider. It had all been an elaborate, sickening fiction. His psychological fortress crumbled into dust. As he stared at the hollow, pathetic man in the reflection, a terrifying question clawed at his throat. Had he intentionally been a monster all these years? Or was he simply a deeply broken, empty shell of a man who didn't know any other way to be loved? Except to hold people hostage? It didn't matter anymore. A security guard stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on his tailored shoulder. Time to go, Mr. Reed. The architect was finally locked out of his own house. 6 months later, there was no grand celebration, no triumphant music playing in the background. Freedom, real freedom, is rarely glamorous. It is quiet. It is exhausted. In a modest, 2-bedroom apartment 300 miles away from New York, the rain tapped gently against the window pane. Claire sat at a small wooden desk in the corner of the living room, the glow of her laptop illuminating her tired eyes. She was working remotely, slowly rebuilding her career from the ground up. Beside her keyboard rested a small, amber prescription bottle. She opened it, swallowing a single anti-anxiety pill with a sip of cold water. Escaping the cage didn't instantly heal the bird. 8 years of psychological warfare had left deep, invisible scars. Her shoulders still flinched when a loud truck drove past the window. She still double-checked the deadbolts 3 times every single night. Peace was incredibly expensive. In the cramped kitchenette nearby, Mila was humming softly, stirring a pot of soup on the electric stove. The suffocating, heavy silence of the penthouse was finally gone. Here, Mila could listen to music. She could cook. She could exist without looking over her shoulder. Mila poured a cup of chamomile tea and walked over to the desk. She set the warm mug down next to the laptop, but she didn't walk away. She stood there, looking down at her mother with a complicated, lingering sadness. "Mom?" Mila asked softly. Claire stopped typing. She gently closed the laptop and looked up. "Yes, sweetie?" Mila hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the wooden edge of the desk. "Did you ever hate Daniel, even back then, when things were so bad?" Claire didn't answer immediately. She picked up the mug, letting the heat seep into her cold hands. She looked past her daughter, out the rain-streaked window and into the gray, sprawling city. Her dark eyes were finally clear, but the pain in them was flat and permanent. "Not enough," Claire whispered, her voice barely louder than the rain. That was the problem. The screen slowly fades to absolute black. The sound of the rain fades into complete silence. The most dangerous enemy in your life isn't always the one who screams. It isn't the one who throws things, or the one who raises a hand. The most terrifying enemy is the one who smiles, holds your hand, and quietly, patiently steals your voice. Thank you for watching Soul-Stirring Stories. If Claire's journey resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We explore the deepest, most complex corners of the human heart every single week. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it today, because sometimes the hardest battle isn't fighting back, it's remembering who you were before the war began.